And joining us now here on Market Talk, really a pleasure to have both of these gentlemen on with me. First up, we have Norman Bessac. He is with the National Pork Board, and also joining us, Rupert Claxton with Gira. And we were talking about a couple new studies that have been commissioned, looking at pork exports to Vietnam and the Philippines, two Asian markets that are really starting to boom for U.S. pork. And gentlemen, I appreciate both of you being on Market Talk today. Thanks so much.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Why don't we start? And first off, Norman, why don't you tell us a little bit just about how this partnership with Gira came about and the reason behind looking at these new reports and these new studies?
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. I think it's very important. Our job in building confidence for U.S. pork around the world and creating value for our producers, it's very clear we need to understand where those demand pools are and how to best connect with them. We have a variety of different markets we serve, from a core market like Japan or Mexico, a developing market like Colombia, and we have a very well-established knowledge-based connection in those markets. The key here for us, how do we position ourselves for growth and shine the light on new opportunities that may exist around the world, and enable the industry to look at those opportunities, connect with those customers, and get balanced growth. I think the concern most people have in today's market is that we're over-dependent on China. Well, the solution to that is to take advantage of that value in China while we can, but build a long-term, diverse investment strategy that gives us sustainable growth. And I think the reason we chose Gira for this is they are an established and recognized firm with a global perspective of the way protein is produced, consumed, and flows through trade around the world. So we really appreciate their perspective and their expertise to create value here in the U.S.
Well, Rupert, let's ask you a little bit just about some of the findings in these reports that Gira found. And first off, I know there was a couple different things looking at the Philippines and Vietnam, but also at ASF. But let's start with just the Philippines and Vietnam. What are some of the findings you found in this report?
Yeah, okay. I mean, good question. Why is it relevant to the US market today? Very clearly, two major pork consuming markets in the Asian region. And when we look across Asia, we find a lot of the markets, chicken is the number one meat. Fish is the leading protein very often in these markets. But in terms of meat, Vietnam and the Philippines are interesting from the outset because pork is so important in the diet, has a traditional role to play. Both countries are struck down with ASF at the moment at slightly different levels. So in Vietnam, it's now end-to-end in the country and has very largely been through its backyard herd and stopped that production. In the Philippines, it's been advancing through this year, and while we've been doing the study, it's still not everywhere in the Philippines, in part because of the archipelago nature of the country. It makes it much harder to move meat and live pigs around, and the upside of that for them is they don't spread the disease as fast as they did in Vietnam. In Vietnam, effectively, by the time they'd identified they had ASF in country, it was already end-to-end. So it really limited what they could do. The reality is in the Philippines, eventually, it too will be end-to-end. Importantly, and in terms of this study, it's in the main production basins that serve the major urban centers. So they've lost a large share of production, but not to the level of Vietnam. So you've got two countries where pork is really important, and they've been reliant on their domestic supply, which has now been turned upside down. And then you layer on top of that in terms of growth, they're in an economic growth phase that's really strong. Vietnam is projected to grow despite the COVID pandemic in 2020, and obviously out into 2021 as they go through this sort of manufacturing development phase. So both countries are in really interesting phases in terms of that, and they're coming from a low level in terms of per capita pork consumption or meat consumption generally. So there are a number of key metrics that when you look at it, you go, that's really interesting. They are going to need a lot more meat in the near term, in the next 5 years. And by the time we get out to the 10-year horizon of this study, then we know they're going to need quite a lot more, and they can't do that domestically, even without ASF. Now, you layer ASF in, we can see that clearly there's an import opportunity. Now, both countries starting again from a different point. Vietnam with very little imports actually sitting in the market. Philippines already had quite a large share of imports coming in for the further processing sector, which is far more developed. So when we set this out at the beginning of the year, it was really clear that there was an opportunity there now to understand. And the question very sensibly from the National Pork Board followed on from what we'd done for them with the China Pork 2040 study last year, was it's not good enough just to go, we can dump product into this market, we can put product into this market in large volumes now, but how do we understand what we're doing with it and therefore build a long-term relationship with the market? Because we need somewhere that we can trade reliably, not just a bit here now, turn it on and off, but it was about building a reliable trade relationship. So that's what we set out to do, is to explain how that product moves through the market, how much domestic product is there, what is the evolutionary state of the channels, where is retailing today, the wet market, modern retail, e-commerce coming in both countries, and again at a low level and different. What does that mean in food service? Where is the food processing sector sitting? And then how do we move all of that together and understand this 5 and 10 year outlook? So that's the opportunity that we've gone in to understand.
Well, and Norman, Rupert mentioned the Pork 2040, the China market assessment, and kind of following up on that. And all of these reports really, I would say it comes down to the National Pork Board obviously doing their homework and doing their best to find new markets for our producers here in the U.S. and to make U.S. pork, a leader globally and competitive globally.
Yeah, Jesse, I think that's a great point. And it's also, this is the fun part of the job. We have to be a student of the economics and the numbers, but then we also have to be very nimble and listen to the market and temper that knowledge and understanding with what's going on, where those opportunities are. A year ago when we released the China study, many of the headlines read, China was in a protein hole for 10, 15 years. There's no way they were going to recover. Well, here we sit a year later, and the headlines and the emotion would say, oh, China's completely recovered. The truth is somewhere in between, right? And so that's why I think it's absolutely crucial that you ground yourself in the insights. You take a look at the numbers and then figure out, okay, what are those actions that we need to take? Producers have told us they want to embrace exports. They get a bit comfortable and a bit nervous when we get to be 30% of exports, representing 30% of production. Our friends to the north in Canada are 60 or 70% export related. That dependence can shock the system. We want to develop sustainable volume and value growth. And the point I would want to reiterate that Rupert made, leading with value is absolutely essential. It can't just be dumping. Investing for the long term means sustainable growth, and that's going to create the most value for our producers.
Definitely, very true. Rupert, I'll ask you, with the findings and the reports, did COVID play a factor? Did you factor in the pandemic and consumption there at all in this report this year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's and we've been talking all year in various circles about two black swans: the black swan of ASF that was very clear coming into this year, and then the black swan of COVID. And we sat at our annual Asian Meat Club meeting in Myanmar in February, as COVID was spreading through the region, and there was a discussion as to, whether we'd even get home from Asia at the time. And Norman was with us and was trying to work out which airports were open to fly back to the US, and so we got back ahead of it. But very clearly, it's been a massive factor this year. Very different in both countries again. Vietnam shut its borders very quickly as COVID spread through the region. Has done an amazing job given all of the infrastructure that they don't have compared to a developed country in controlling the disease and controlling its impact. And you can discuss whether or not it's been reported at the right levels. But the reality is it's just not there at the level that we're seeing in the US or in Europe at the moment. Philippines has been through a very different process. They have had a bigger problem with it. They've been through a prolonged lockdown that they are now gently working their way out of. But I'm talking about a country that locked down late March, early April, and is only just in November started to ease those restrictions. That has a huge toll on the economy. Official figures suggesting that it might be 25% unemployment, unofficial numbers suggesting it could be as high as 50. They haven't got the remunerations that come in from overseas workers, Filipinos working on ships, working in factories around the world, working as nannies and maids. That is really important to the affordability of meat in the country. And I can't stress that enough. So things, we were well aware of where COVID was as we worked on this. And one of the issues that we had was getting in country, but we have teams in both countries, so that helped. But even moving around in the countries was restricted at phases, find ways to duck and weave and to see what's going on. So we could see firsthand what the impact of COVID was. We could factor that in to where it put the consumption now this year, and what does it mean for the trade today, but also what is it going to mean for the economy going forward into 2021 and out to 25, and therefore how can consumption recover, because we're clearly in a hole today, not just because of COVID, but because of ASF as well. And so we had to layer those two things in to understand where we're going. And that's why this isn't just about going, what is the import opportunity for the US? It's about going, where is the market today in these countries? What is driving it? What do people care about? And therefore, how do we build a long-term position in that as a supplier?
And I think that's a great thought, or a great point you mentioned there, Rupert. And looking at producers, obviously they're hoping to find more export business. And I know the Pork Board and the partnership with Gira, you guys are doing great things with these reports and these studies. Gentlemen, any other final thoughts you'd have, either one of you, to share about this report here today on Market Talk?
Yeah, Jesse, just one thing. It may be an endorsement that I want to make sure we recognize. The key to this report is the insight, but we also value the contribution that we've gotten through matching funds and grants from USDA FAS and their emerging market program. Essentially, what it means is we've been able to do a lot of good work and extend producer dollars by partnering with FAS. So I would want to recognize their support and the support of the National Pork Producers Council. They certainly open the doors and enable us to do business in those markets.
Definitely. Well, I know we will link the study up to markettalkag.com. Folks can go there and check out the entire study. And Rupert, Norman, I appreciate the time today and shedding light on this great new study. Thank you guys so much for joining me here on Market Talk.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Jesse.
Rupert Claxton with Gira and Norman Bessac with the National Pork Board joining us here on Market Talk. I'm your host, Jesse Allen. Have a great day.